Beyond the Gates spoilers reveal that a fight erupted over a single decision. Martin arranged for Samantha to meet her biological mother, June, and Smitty nominal father, journalist-like in temperament, reacted as if a crack had opened in the family's fragile foundation. The scene begins with the normalcy of family life: coffee cups on the kitchen island, a few school announcements, Samantha's backpack slumped by the door like a tired animal. The argument itself isn't cinematic: no raised voices, no slamming doors, but its implications are seismic. It's a fight about trust, about secrecy, about the messy, vivid calculus of what it means to protect a child who's also a human being with her own past. Martin moves through the house with the slow, careful gait of someone who has kept his life together by being dependable. He is practical in a way that once made him the anchor of the family: meticulous bills, steady job, a small stubborn tenderness that shows up in grilled cheese on sick days and in the way he remembers dates. Smitty, a generator of combustible ideas, sees the world as something to be written about, deconstructed, turned into narratives that matter. He's been a reporter long enough to know that the right story will open doors, and also, to know how dangerous it can be to open the wrong door at the wrong time. Between them sits Samantha, almost a teenager, with March wind hair and a tendency to study the space between adults when they speak, as though she's trying to learn how to be part of their argument without breaking it. Smitty is preparing a presentation. The projector is set up in their small living room turned studio, slides arranged like stepping stones, statistics about adopted children who reconnect with birth parents, interviews with therapists who warn of identity confusion, case studies where reunions led to renewed anguish. He has chosen a clinical arc for the talk: an evidence-based narrative about the unforeseen consequences when birth parents re-enter children's lives after long absences. It is the kind of talk that will make foundations nod, that will insert his byline into policy conversations. He rehearses the transitions aloud, then stops when his voice cracks on the word hour. There is, of course, a personal access to this work. Smitty's paper is not detached. He has spent nights drafting bullet points that rely on the contours of his own family's story without ever naming them. He rationalizes, the issue is too important to ignore, the data must be compiled, and his family's experience is a textbook example of the paradox. Martin senses that Smitty is about to weaponize their private life, that he's about to turn their children into a cautionary tale. When Martin reminds Smitty that the case is too close to home, it is a plea and a warning wrapped together. He imagines their two children reading the talk transcript one day and seeing themselves reduced to graphs and quotes. He imagines Samantha wondering whether her longing for June was a curiosity or a mistake that will be criticized in conference halls. Smitty, who believes in the public power of truth, answers with a kind of brittle conviction. He tells Martin that telling the truth about these reunions can prevent future harm, that honesty is not cruelty. But when Smitty's voice hardens, Martin hears history, Smitty's ledger of hurt, the times he's sacrificed quiet for clarity, the nights banging on keyboards until dawn. Martin's fear is not rhetorical. He remembers Samantha at 3, at 5, testing boundaries she did not deserve to explore. He remembers learning what adopted meant by watching the neurological twitch of other parents when the subject came up, the half-sympathetic nod, the small questions that implied deficiency. Martin's protective instincts light up at the idea that their children could become case studies. There is a fundamental philosophical split in how they imagine safety. Smitty's posture is preventive: expose patterns, create a policy bubble, keep children from becoming destabilized by unchecked reunions. Martin's is relational: you cannot legislate the human heart. Sometimes risk must be taken because the alternative, a life without knowledge of origins, is its own injury. The talk, then, becomes freighted. Smitty insists that the case is bigger than any one family. Martin sees how a claim of objectivity can be a cloak for the very subjectivity of fear. Tensions spike when Martin explains what he's done. Without consulting Smitty, he has arranged for Samantha to meet June. The arrangement is quiet and small: a supervised coffee at a town cafe with neutral lighting, a third-party counselor present, a short window to see whether familiarity blooms or withers. Martin believes Samantha is ready to know. He believes that secrecy has been more corrosive than risk. He believes, above all, that the child's autonomy must be honored. This decision lands like an unannounced storm in Smitty's orderly thinking. Smitty hears the news and his anger is precise, not a torrent but a series of sharp questions. How could Martin decide this alone? Had he thought about the emotional fallout? The moral hazard? The way June's past could resurface? He speaks of June's history with a clarity that conceals judgment: drug addiction, relapses, spells of unreliability. Smitty is not cruel, he is cautious to the point of obsession. He is certain that Samantha's curiosity is a vector for harm if the person she meets is not stable. Martin pushes back. June has been in recovery for a year, employed at a community kitchen, going to meetings, taking accountability. People change, he says. Smitty answers with the stubbornness of someone who has seen repeat patterns in the human soul and refuses optimistic magic. "You stop lying to me," he warns Martin, an odd, high-stakes admonition that is part domestic plea, part professional reproach. He means that Martin's unilateral action feels like a betrayal, and he will not forgive if secrecy continues to guide their decisions. Smitty's warning carries more than marital strain. It carries the sense that a rupture now could become permanent, a withdrawal of trust that cannot be mended with apologies. Smitty frames forgiveness as conditional in a way that is not entirely fair, or perhaps it is exactly fair, because hope without boundaries can become cruelty. He understands, intimately, what it is to be the one who keeps facts intact against wishful thinking. Yet his method reads to Martin as paternalism. On that Saturday, as Smitty drives to pick up Samantha for the planned meeting, the neighborhood looks ordinary: mailboxes, cars raked with fingerprints of weather. He steers with a stomach full of cholesterols and coffee, rehearsing the worst-case scenarios mentally. He picks Samantha up from her art class and is surprised to find Marcel leaning against his SUV, leaning in the way men do when they have gravity. Marcel is a man with a slow smile and a presence like a bank vault. He is someone Smitty has written about before, someone whose business dealings were central in a profile that thumped across the city's morning. It had been a critical piece about marble and glass redevelopment, about zoning games, and it had not been kind. Marcel remembers. Troublesome reporter, Marcel says as if he's quoting someone else. He mentions Elon, someone who, in their shared orbit, once said that Smitty had a knack for making people uncomfortable in the economy of power. The reference is not out of the blue. There is history between media and money here. Smitty knows the shake of it. Marcel's face is soft as linen, but his eyes are exact, and the remark contains a pressure like a rainstorm beginning outside a window. They talk. Marcel reveals he's read a copy of Smitty's dossier about him, the long file that Smitty collected for a manuscript he'd planned to publish. Smitty has known for months that his research could rattle the wrong cages. He's kept two versions of the manuscript, a polished, journalistically careful iteration intended for publication, and a raw archive, unedited, unredacted, that exists in the cloud and on a hard drive he carries like an insurance policy. The raw archive contains notes, source names, private emails, the kind of material that can make reputations crumble if mishandled. Marcel says simply that he wants the unvetted copy deleted. Smitty reacts as a reporter might, with a quiet demonstration of principle. Delete the file, and the facts of Marcel's actions do not disappear. Destroy the archive and an unfair advantage disappears, but the reality that motivated Smitty's investigation will remain, he insists. To him, deletion is fantasy. Marcel offers an exchange friendly at first, then language that narrows, some favors for silence, a euphemistic help with a legal problem for a little discretion about what Smitty has collected. Smitty refuses. Not out of ego but out of an embedded belief that the public has a right to know. Marcel's smile thins, and for a moment they stand in the parking lot as two tectonic plates figuring out one another's weight. What Marcel cannot know, or what he tries to ignore, is that Smitty has been circling closer to illegality in his methods, not by intent but by desperation. Conversations that used to be conducted off the record have become recorded, off-grid payments have moved through envelopes, tips smuggled in from anonymous emails, sometimes from Joey, sometimes from others. Smitty has rationalized the slippage in terms of ons and means. Exposing truth sometimes requires bending rules. Ink doesn't stick to the powerful otherwise. Yet every time he bends, he feels a small fracture in himself. He watches his own moral compass spin. He thinks of Martin, who keeps a cleaner ledger and is less inclined to flirt with the gray zones. Marcel's request to delete the file is not merely about a manuscript. It is a test of how much Smitty can be coerced, bought, or pushed. Smitty's resistance earns him an odd kind of curiosity from Marcel. A promise that trouble begets trouble. Marcel drops a name Joey as if the mention alone will alter Smitty's perception. Joey is not an abstract villain, he is someone who moves in and out of the shadows of the town's economy, someone who knows when to offer a hand and when to make a hold. On the ride home, the implications fold in on themselves. If Smitty refuses to delete the file, Marcel has the means to make life unpleasant. If he deletes it, he betrays an ethos. If he hides it better, it still exists somewhere. The binary is a trap. Moral clarity has been reduced to a series of small, compromised options. Meanwhile, the family's scheduled meeting with June presses like a fever in his pocket. Smitty keeps thinking of Samantha's face when she asked, in a small voice, whether she could meet June. Smitty's immediate internal reaction was to say no. He wasn't only thinking of June's past. He was thinking of the slippage of trust that could occur between the adults if he allowed the meeting to happen without full consensus. Trust between parents, he feels, is the scaffolding of everyone else's safety. When the meeting occurs the cafe, the counselor at a corner table, sunlight softened through glass. Smitty carries his suspicion like a visible object. June arrives late. She is neither glamorous nor broken in a stereotype. She looks worn but not defeated, a face marked by time and labor, a pair of hands that have held a broom, a tray, a child once and again. She sits down quietly and says, in the tentative grammar of someone asking forgiveness, that she has done the work to be reliable. She has a pamphlet from a recovery program in her bag. She can produce names of sponsors, letters from a caseworker, proof of employment. June's narrative is everyday kindling, slipping, hitting bottom, climbing out, the liturgy of recovery. Smitty's greeting is clipped. He has rehearsed what he will and will not allow the encounter to become. He addresses June in the manner of someone who must maintain boundaries. The children's safety is non-negotiable. He says, perhaps too harshly, that time may make June forget the children. The line is intended to be protective, but it lands as corrosive insult. Samantha calls it out immediately. She sees the selfishness in Smitty's logic with a clarity that is disarming. Are you saying my memories are nothing? She asks, or something like it, eyes suddenly dangerous with hurt. Samantha's empathy toward June makes Smitty's authoritarianism seem small. He is the adult in charge, and the children who have lived the absence differently cannot be reduced to a risk assessment matrix. June's response is not theatrical. She bends forward and says she has thought of the children every day. She speaks of the moments of shame and of learning, the hours of counseling, the names of people who helped her. There is no grand absolution, only a pleading desire to be seen not as a danger but as a human who has failed and attempted to repair. Smitty, for all his talk about data-driven caution, feels a crack of empathy in an inconvenient place. He remembers the quiet shame that fed his own obsessions. He remembers a younger self who judged others harshly to avoid being judged. He keeps the meeting clinical, formalizing conditions for any further meetings, supervised access, no unscheduled appearances, a written plan for contact. It is in the language of those conditions that Samantha finally recognizes a truth about Smitty she had suspected but not admitted. His need to control sometimes masquerades as care. She watches him as he frames the terms, the lines of protection folded like a map. He insists on surveillance because surveillance feels like love to him. He believes in creating frameworks because frameworks are measurable. Samantha sees the paradox. An adult who insists upon measurable safety may be blinding himself to the unmeasurable necessity of belonging. Smitty's admonitions wound June and the children in different ways. For June, there is humiliation, the residue of being told she is the threat. For Samantha, There is realization that her adopted family's impulse to preserve might be shaped more by fear than by love. For Martin, there is a peculiar loneliness. He, who arranged the meeting, feels caught between the two defenses. He wants Smitty to acknowledge June's progress, and he wants Samantha to have knowledge of her origin. He is not naive about the risks, he simply believes the risk is worth taking. As the day settles into evening, other strands tighten. Joanne, a social worker who has been advising the family, calls Martin privately and mentions that there have been murmurs about Smitty's dossier. She tells him, carefully, that the raw file contains allegations that could be used to harm people, including Marcel, and that people like Marcel have the inclination and resources to retaliate. Martin feels a chill go through him. The family's private quarrel is no longer confined to the living room. It has spread into the public square where money and influence operate. He begins to imagine the effects on his children, the sudden intrusion of a scandal, the gossip, the questions that could damage the fragile process of Samantha's exploration. Joey, whose name has surfaced in Marcel's half-mock, half-warning tone, is another axis of menace. He is known in town as someone who traffics in favors and penalties. Joey has, in the past, befriended and then used men like Martin, tradesmen who need credit, small business owners with a single vulnerability. The thought that Martin might be used by Joey is not abstract. Martin owns a modest landscaping business with a line of credit. Any pressure there could make him pliant. Marcel's offer to help with legal matters is not a kindly hand. It is a lever that might pivot Martin into complicity if the wrong calls are made. But for now, the family retreats into routine. Samantha goes to bed with a head full of new names and a heart swollen by recognition. She thinks of June's hands, the smell of coffee at the cafe, the way June smiled when she spoke about gardening. The children are liminal creatures in this story. They are the ones who must reconcile two histories, and their day-to-day life will be the terrain upon which adults enact promises, betrayals, and repairs. Smitty, that night, sits at the kitchen table with his presentation and the files strewn around him. He toggles between data sets and personal notes, between the urgency of the talk and the tenderness he is not apt to show. He knows that his forthcoming public speech could be read as a projection of his private anxieties, and he is restless with that knowledge. He worries, too, about the dossier and what it might mean if Marcel moves. He thinks of deletion as a betrayal and preservation as a threat. The double bind sits like a stone in his gut. Martin, alone in his bedroom, thinks of Joey and of debts. He wonders if accepting help from a man who might have leverage over him would be a betrayal of his own moral standard. He questions whether his unilateral decision to arrange the meeting was bravely honest or arrogantly reckless. He pictures Samantha in 5 years, a woman with a layered understanding of parentage, or else a woman who resents the adults who allowed complexity but shielded nothing. His worry is not only for the children. It is for the adults and the possibility that one misstep can leave marks that therapy might not erase. June goes home to a small apartment that smells faintly of tea and laundry detergent. She reads her recovery pamphlets again and lays out, like a pleading map, the steps she intends to take to keep the bond safe. She knows what she has done. She knows the fragility of the moment. She spends the night imagining what Samantha's laughter might sound like in a kitchen she once had. Her longing is simple and enormous. She wants to prove that she is not the sum of her past mistakes. The next morning, the town wakes to a banal procession, children rubbing sleep from eyes, coffee shops opening, a dog barking in exactly the wrong rhythm. The larger, quieter dangers are also awake. Marcel has not left the matter untreated. Someone in his circle has made a discreet inquiry about Smitty's files. A man in a suit arrives at a mutual acquaintance's hardware store and asks questions that will ripple. Joey, perhaps, has decided to observe and measure where leverage might be found. And in the center of this web, the children are preparing for a week of school. They are unknowingly the axis of stakes that are far larger than their age deserves. The story has now expanded beyond the domestic argument to include public stakes and private ethics. The decisions made in a kitchen chair whether to introduce Samantha to June, whether to keep or delete a dossier have become movements with consequences that touch power and poverty. journalistic integrity and parental commitment. The question of who is right dissolves into something more painful: who will be left to pick up the pieces if the truth, whatever shape it takes, is used as a weapon? The meeting looms again like an unguarded door. The adults each nurse their own certainties, their own fears, their own moral economies. The children, who live in a time frame measured in months rather than long-term strategy, have no idea that the choice of a coffee shop table might catalyze a confrontation between money and truth, between the law of fathers and the law of tenderness. And somewhere between the cloud-stored files and Samantha's small hand finding her mother's across a cafe table, an unseen clock ticks. The next movement is inevitable. The adults are setting the stage, whether they intend to or not. The question is not merely whether June will be allowed to see her child, but whether the adults guarding that moment can resist using their own secrets as bargaining chips. The spectacle promises to test loyalties, to redraw moral boundaries, and to reveal how much each person in this fragile circle will sacrifice in the name of safety, story, and self-preservation.